Welcome to this live broadcast of the online lecture, Impacts of Climate Change on Coastal Archaeological Sites in County Kerry by Fergus McCormick, Senior Architect in the Monuments section of the Office of Public Works. This is a closed YouTube live event. It will have a duration of approximately 30 minutes. The entire event will be recorded for later posting online. There will be a Q&A session after the talk, so if you would like to submit questions, you can do so via the live chat in YouTube. It is the third in the series of 4 talks that will explore climate change and archaeology. The talks are being given by members of the Climate Change Advisory Group for Built Archaeological Heritage, and they are chaired by Nessa O'Connor, Assistant Keeper and Archaeologist in the Irish Antiquities Division of the National Museum of Ireland, who will now introduce the lecture.
Thank you very much, Siobhan, and thank you all for being with us today. In recent days, we've seen stark reminders of the effects of climate change with really high temperatures at home, which we're all enjoying, and stark images from Germany and adjoining countries of the truly awful effects of high rainfall and flooding. In our first 2 lectures in this series, we've had a great introduction to the topic of climate change and its effects, both in Ireland and around the world as well, and we saw a very large and varied number of different kinds of sites. So, today's lecture is going to be different in that we will have an opportunity to have a much more detailed look at 3 specific sites: Dunbeg, Fort in West Kerry, Skellig Michael, and Ballinskelligs Abbey, all in County Kerry. These sites are in spectacular but exposed locations that make them all the more vulnerable and precarious. Skelligs, of course, has been very much in the news recently because it opened up again to the public in early July. And we also saw fleeting glances of Dunbeg during the first 2 lectures in the series. These are really excellent case studies, I think, of the coastal effects of climate change in Ireland. So today, we'll not only have the benefit of the first-hand expert knowledge of our speaker today, Fergus, who's just introduced to you now briefly. He's here on screen with us.
Hello, everyone.
But we'll also see some very dramatic drone and other images of the sites. And I won't preempt the presentation or what Fergus is going to tell us about by saying any more about that. But I think you're going to find both the lecture and the photographic images really exciting and fascinating. So just to introduce Fergus a little more to you, Fergus McCormick is a senior conservation architect working in the Monuments section of the Office of Public Works in Dublin. Fergus is responsible for the repair and maintenance of national monuments in state care, essentially in the Cork and Kerry area, the Killarney and Mallow OPW districts. His responsibility include particularly the management of Skellig Michael, which is, of course, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. He has many years' experience of working with historic buildings and their conservation in Ireland, England, and also in Germany. Fergus is currently the OPW representative to the advisory group for the Climate Change Adaptation Plan for the Built Archaeological Heritage. Quite a mouthful, but you know what I mean. So I'm not going to say any more. I won't preempt what we're about to hear any further. And just to say that it gives me very great pleasure to introduce Fergus to you today and invite you to join us in hearing his lecture entitled The Impact of Climate Change on Coastal Archaeological Sites in County Kerry. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Fergus McCormick. I'm Senior Architect at the Office of Public Works, National Monuments Section. My presentation this afternoon is on the impact of climate change on coastal archaeological sites in County Kerry. I'll be dealing with 3 sites: Dunbeg Promontory Fort on the Dingle Peninsula, Ballinskelligs Priory on the Iveragh Peninsula, and then Skellig Michael World Heritage Site, which is approximately 13 kilometres out in the Atlantic. These sites are Dunbeg Promontory Fort, as you can see here, Ballinskelligs Priory, and then Skellig Michael World Heritage Site. We'll start with Dunbeg Promontory Fort. This is an Iron Age fort situated on a promontory on the Dingle Peninsula Very famous site and very interesting. The site has been subject to coastal erosion for many decades now, since the 19th century, and quite a lot of the site has been lost in recent decades. Into January 2018, there was a major cliff collapse following a series of storms, Atlantic storms. The site then was closed to the public, and we carried out our investigations and surveys. You can see here the cliff collapse, which caused extensive damage to the site and loss of historic fabric. This photograph is from the 1970s and shows the entrance as it was then. In 1977, due to the ongoing coastal erosion, the Department of Culture and Heritage at the time carried out an extensive archaeological excavation of the site. So we have very good archaeological records of this site. In 2018, you can see we've lost a lot of historic fabric, and we have the lintel stone over the entrance, which is perched precariously on the cliff. This shot shows you the extent of coastal erosion, which affected the fencing, protective fencing, which OPW had installed approximately 10 years ago. So the erosion is getting closer and closer into the monument. We also had an issue of drainage. There's a drain running from the mountains behind the site, right down beside the access road and into the site. Due to extreme precipitation fall, this drain overflowed onto the footpath and completely destroyed it. It also came out, the floodwaters came out onto the site and scoured out a route through the site and made it totally impassable for tourists. As a result, we had to close the site immediately, and OPW put in sandbags to divert the storm surge water from the drain back into the drain. And we also put protective sandbags on site to fill in the areas scoured out. This is the site before works began, and you can see the existing fencing on the perimeter of the site. This site shows the works that were carried out. The first work that were carried out following a grant of consent was the installation of a perimeter fence to secure the site from visitors. We then installed a drainage wall, which was designed to deflect any drain waters which overflowed out of the drain back into the drain. We also commissioned an engineering consultant to carry out a geophysical survey of the site to determine the rate of erosion of the site. On foot of that report, we installed a new pathway down into the site for visitors and new fencing to allow visitor access, safe visitor access down into the site. Here's a photograph of the perimeter fencing, which we installed as the first item. And then we repaired the path leading down to the site, and we carried out repairs to the drain. On the site itself, we constructed this drainage wall at the entrance to the site. And there it is completed. And you can see here that if the water comes out of that drain, it hits the drainage wall and redirected back into the existing drain. We also carried out extensive repairs to the drain, which goes around the perimeter of the site. We put in stonework on the side of the drain so it wouldn't be gouged out by the storm surge and rainwater. Unfortunately, that didn't work. We still had extensive rainfall coming down in the drain and gouging out the sides of the drain. So we had to install a culvert, which we did in April 2021. And we've covered it now with topsoil and grass, so you can't see it or detect it when you arrive on site. This is the OPW team which were working on site in 2018 and up till recently. And here is one of our workers, Brendan O'Connor, who's an expert in health and safety, attaching ropes to the lintel over the doorway. And then this lintel was pulled away, and we've saved it, and we're going to show it on site. We also carried out archaeological investigation, the last part, on site, on the route of our pathway down into the site. This was carried out by Lar Dunn, archaeologist. It was quite an extensive excavation. Then we installed our path and we installed new fencing down to the site to give safe visitor access. Here you can see the fencing and the safe visitor access down into the base of the site. And here you can see the stone lintel, which we are now going to put on a pedestal, and we're going to put in interpretive signage, which will tell the story of this site, its history, and its erosion, and the effect of climate change on this historical site. The OPW policy is managed retreat from this site. We cannot save it from the elements. It will eventually disappear and fall into the Atlantic, but we want to preserve visitor access to the site as long as possible so we can tell the story of the site and climate change. You can see here photographs that there's continual erosion on the site, and we've now completely lost the historic entrance. The cliff, the upper part of it is clay, so it's very exposed to the elements, and we would expect further cliff erosion in the coming years. This photograph in 1898 shows the green line here, which is the original cliff face at the time. The blue line on this drawing shows April 2018, showing the extensive amount of site which was lost in that period, and the extensive amount of archaeological heritage which has been lost. We have commissioned the Discovery Programme to map the site by drone, and this allows us to gauge the amount of incremental loss to the cliff every year. And this is a shot of the drone survey. So this site is very well documented, both in digital form and archaeological drawings and research from the 1970s. So if it is lost, we have a very good record of the site for posterity. I now want to turn to Ballinskelligs Priory, which is located in Ballinskelligs Bay, a very scenic area in County Kerry. The monks in Skellig Michael retreated from the monastery on Skellig in about the 13th century, and they founded the priory here. Much of the site has already been lost to coastal erosion over the past century. So this has been an ongoing problem on this site. You can see here the sea wall, which is really protecting the site from further coastal erosion and damage. There's also Ballinskelligs Castle, which is further down the coast, but this is not in government ownership. You can see here the coastal erosion on both sides of the site. And these photographs from the 1930s show the original stone seawall, which had suffered extensive damage and was cracking. And in parts it had disappeared at that stage. So in the 1940s and 50s, the council installed this very large concrete retaining wall on the site to protect it, a seawall. This seawall has not been repaired in many years, and the sea and the storm damage is scouring out underneath it. So we do need to repair it and to upgrade this wall, which will be a very expensive task. In winter, you have storm damage where the storms hit that seawall and come in up over the wall, and they throw stones onto site and they damage the historic buildings on site and damage the gravestones. Here's a shot from 2018 showing the power of the sea, where they've lifted concrete grave slabs and shifted them meters from where they were. So the power of the sea is very powerful. Here are repointing and grouting works, which will be carried out to all the structures on site, and this shots from the abbot's house. So we grout the walls, we repoint them in lime water, and we carry out wall top repairs to future-proof the site from climate change. In 2019, Adapt Northern Heritage carried out a climate change workshop in Ballinskelligs, and we attended this with other stakeholders, and it was very beneficial. As a result of this, we commissioned Kerry Conservation to carry out a climate change risk assessment on the site, and this was the first climate change risk assessment carried out on a national monument site in Ireland. We're carrying out extensive repairs on site, and one of these is the repair to the cloister tomb, and we have re-roofed this in Valentia slate using medieval methods. So each slate is kept in place by a timber dowel, and here's a shot of the timber dowel being cut to fit into each individual hole. This is a shot of the finished works with the slate roof over the tomb, and this has weathered the Atlantic storms in the last 2 years, so we're very happy with this. Also, we retrieved many fragments of the other cloister, which has been lost, and we rebuilt those in the site compound and applied for ministerial consent to rebuild these. We received ministerial consent, and here you can see those cloister fragments rebuilt on site. Now I'm turning to the last project, which is Skellig Michael World Heritage Site, which is located 13 kilometres in the Atlantic and is very exposed to the elements. There's the world famous monastery, founded in the 6th century and vacated in the 13th century. And OPW carry out maintenance works on the monastery from April to September every year. It's also a very popular tourist destination and opened on the 1st of July this year to tourists again. The site was closed in 2020 due to COVID. Here you can see the location of the monastery, which was well chosen by the monks up on the top of the peak and has its own microclimate. You can see the Lighthouse Road down on the left-hand side, which was blasted out in the 1820s by the lighthouse keepers. And then we have the landing pier. So the landing pier is the only access to the site for visitors and for OPW workers and bringing all our materials in through this area. So it's a very vulnerable area. And also all the visitor boats come in here during the summer period. There's 180 visitors allowed each day, and this has been agreed with UNESCO. And in 2019, there was roughly 15,600 visitors from April to September visited Skellig Michael. Here we have a shot of the lifeboat arriving at the pier in June 2019 for our rescue exercise. As I said, this pier is very vulnerable to climate change and to sea swell and storm damage. And during those periods, the waves come up over the pier and make it inaccessible for OPW workers and for tourists. So the amount of days per season where we cannot get out to the island are increasing due to the increase in the severity of storms and swell. Here we can see a rescue exercise taking place, Kerry Mountain Rescue, and the Coast Guard Mountain Rescue section came out twice in 2019. And this exercise comprised of taking a dummy casualty from the monastery down the 600 steps to the landing pier. And this stretcher had to be secured then by anchors, which we have in place and we put in place at the start of the season. And you can see here the stretcher being brought down the steps. This is a very, very important exercise to carry out. And then at the landing pier itself, the stretcher has to be transported from this area onto the lifeboat. And this is a critical element because the lifeboat could be going very up and down in bad weather. So you can see here at all times, the stretcher has to be attached by rope either to the lifeboat or on land. We need to future-proof the landing pier now and raise it so that it future-proof it for future sea level rise and for storm surge. Another very serious issue is rockfall on the island. There's always been rockfall on this island, but we've had two very serious rockfalls near the workers' huts in recent years. These photographs show the rockfall in 2017. Luckily, there was nobody on the island. This happened in April, early April. You can see here very large boulders, and if anybody had been walking here, they would have been seriously injured or killed. So this is a very concerning development. You can see here our OPW accommodation. This is where the OPW guides are the workers, actually, the guides of other huts. These are the workers live here Monday to Friday, April to September. The rockfall occurred very near to this. And then in 2020, we had another rockfall in exactly the same location. Luckily, there were no OPW workers on site at the time, but we had two cameramen, but they were on another part of the island. Now, this rockfall occurred after very heavy rainfall in Skellig Michael and also on the mainland, and this caused flooding, if you might remember, in Kenmare on the Sunday, and then the rockfall happened on Skellig on the Monday morning. We've installed crash decks on this site, temporary crash decks, and on two other locations on the Upper Lighthouse Road. And we've gone out to tender, commission external contractors to install heavy-duty metal crash decks in this location and the other two locations. We would hope to have these crash decks in place by the end of September, if the weather permits. Now we just turn to the monastery. We've had a history of failure of the retaining walls in the monastery over the centuries, and the monks, following each failure, would simply have rebuilt those terraces and retaining walls. Discovery programme come out to Skellig every year and carry out a survey of the retaining walls and other elements on the island, and they've reported that there is movement in this wall by 3 to 5 millimeters. So we will at some stage have to take down this whole retaining wall and rebuild it, because there is a danger of collapse here at some stage in the future. This is caused again by climate change and by the pressure of water coming down through the monastery and through that wall. This is a drawing from the 19th century of St. Michael's Church showing an historic repair to that section of retaining wall. So you can see that there's been a history of repairs on this section of wall. I'll turn now to the other works on Skellig Michael, which we're carrying out for the last 3 years. There's the Upper Lighthouse Road, which connects the two lighthouses. This road has been in disuse in the 1870s, and there's been a huge amount of debris and rockfall on this road. We've carried out extensive excavation on the road and removed the debris. We've repaired the walls where they've required repair, and we've put in new Valentia slate for any areas where the existing capping has been lost. You can see here this section has been repaired, and we've exposed the drains which were put in by the lighthouse keepers in the 1820s on the right hand side, which are very sculptural and very beautiful. And these also have the function in that they drain into culverts which go out through the wall, through the seawall. This section of the Upper Lighthouse Road was completely destroyed over time and completely lost, and this shot from 2019 shows that the wall is completely lost. We excavated here and then completely rebuilt the seawall in this location. We carried out repairs in lime mortar, and you can see the repairs on the inside, which is the repointing in lime mortar. But externally the walls are left unmortared because the birds nest in them. You can see the crash deck that's been installed here, and you can see above any amount of those rocks could at any time probably come crashing down into this area. This is one of the areas we want to put in the heavy duty metal crash decks. Now it is intended that when we're finished these works, the public will be allowed access to this part of the island to see the 19th century archaeology of the Upper Lighthouse Road. So it will be a visitor attraction in future years, but we need to future-proof it and make it safe and put in the crash decks in those two locations. You can see here the lower lighthouse, which was vacated in the 1980s by the Commissioner of Irish Lights. Up to then it was a manned lighthouse, and they installed a small lamp on the outside of the existing lighthouse, so it still functions as a beacon to shipping. Irish Lights carry out their inspections and maintenance of that light twice or 3 times a year and land by helicopter on the island. OPW have a lease with Irish Lights now to take over the accommodation area, and in the last 2 years we've stripped out the internal dry lining which was installed by the lighthouse keepers in the 1980s. And we've now gone back to the original fabric from the 1820s. You can see here the rubble stone external walls. And here again, the external walls. And in the 1980s, the lighthouse keepers took off the pitch roof and put a concrete roof on. And we're going to have to carry out extensive repairs to this fabric. Here you can see the original lighthouse keeper's bedroom, which has been exposed for the first time in decades. And you can see the RSJ there with the concrete roof is badly corroded on the right-hand side as it goes into the external wall facing the elements. And we will have to repair all that fabric. The proposal is to turn the lighthouse into safe accommodation for OPW workers, guides, consultants and archaeologists. I'll turn now to the Upper Lighthouse, which was abandoned by the Commissioner of Irish Lights in the 1820s. And that was because they built another lighthouse on Inishtirrocht. So this lighthouse became redundant. You can see here a shot of the external walls and seawall, which is deteriorated quite badly. And it is a roofless ruin. This shot here shows the sea wall, which has lost its capping stone many years ago and is now rapidly deteriorating. So each time we come out during the summer, we've lost more of this fabric. We have received ministerial consent now to repair this seawall, and we'd hope to start this process this year. We've also carried out emergency repairs internally to the windows, and we've put in timber lintels to replace the original timber lintels, which have long since rotted. And you can see here the emergency repairs. So we intend repairing this lighthouse and turning it into a tourist attraction in coming years. This year has been very exciting because we have started the excavation of the lighthouses of debris, and we found the original stone floors in the upper lighthouses. So this season we will concentrate on continuing this very important work.
Come in there, 6 of you. That's perfect. Thank you. Rock there. Yeah, you can lock off there now. Face good. It was good.
I hope you've enjoyed this lecture, and I thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Fergus. That was really wonderful. And I think as viewers, we can appreciate it all the more because we could never, ever have that kind of access any other way. And I suppose it has to be one of the advantages of us all being more active on screen through Zoom, Teams, or whatever other type of software. But even if we were all to decamp right now to each of those sites, you know, you could only have the smallest level of sense of being at the site compared with what we've just seen. And I thought the footage particularly was amazing, and the sounds as well, the sound of the ocean in the background really gave you a sense of the vulnerability of the sites. I think we may have some questions shortly. Just looking to see where they are now. I don't see them. At the moment, I don't have access to the side of the screen. But in any case, it just strikes me, particularly Fergus, just at first glance, at Ballinskelligs Priory, it seemed a relatively benign location compared with the others. So I was just wondering, you know, if you could comment in any way on that. I suppose, though, when we heard the sound of the waves thundering, that the Atlantic is nonetheless impinging on that location, maybe not as visibly as at the other sites.
Yeah, Nessa, I think the problem with Ballinskelligs is a huge amount of the site has already been lost. You know, about a third of the site is gone. And if you know, the authorities, or the local authority and the OPW hadn't intervened and put that concrete seawall in, there'd be nothing left of it. So, I mean, the shots, it's a beautiful spot. I mean, I've been down there on fantastic days and it looks very calm, but because it's in the bay, that doesn't protect it from Atlantic storms and swell. So I think part of the problem too is the actual seawall, that the force of the waves hitting that wall, the water goes vertically up and over the wall, and it throws debris and stones into the site.
Yep.
But if the seawall wasn't there, it wouldn't exist. Obviously, Skellig is an island, so it's completely exposed, and Dunbeg is there's nothing you can do about Dunbeg. We are going to lose it. We will lose that site, and we have been losing it for decades, if not the last century. But it has been recorded, and you know, the question is the resources that you put into these sites. I mean, with Dunbeg, I suppose we brought the visitors in to look at the site, but we're not going to be committing too many resources to try and hold back the sea. Like King Canute, you can't do that. But at Ballinskelligs, we have repaired the site, so we've made it as climate resilient as possible.
Thank you, Fergus. And I think it's very interesting for us as well to see the constant balancing of different factors, you know, that you're not just dealing purely with conservation architecture, but you have to think of so many other issues. Firstly, health and safety, and the safety of the visitors to the sites. Very interesting too, that whole area of managed loss, which Kathy Daly dealt with as well in her lecture. I'm just going to turn to a few questions now, which Fergus has kindly agreed to answer as well. Just taking the first one here, I'll read it out as it comes to me. Is there modelling or potential future mapping of the speed of erosion in certain areas to try and plan for the future protection of particularly vulnerable areas of these sites? I suppose it's a fairly constant process, really, of recording.
Well, we're doing that at Dunbeg, in that the Discovery Programme have been commissioned by us to go back every year and to monitor the rate of decay on that. It's very hard to model it because, you know, how do you know how much is going to go in a year or whatever? The issue at Dunbeg is that if it accelerates exponentially and gets to a point where you say, well, look, it's too dangerous to allow visitors down into that site, and you will stop visitors, because obviously loss of life is a huge issue. We don't want anybody dying on any OPW site. With Ballinskelligs, I suppose the concrete seawall has to be repaired, but the issue there is that you will have the coastal erosion on both sides of the seawall. So the seawall is like a fixed element, and then each side. But if you were to extend the seawall, that has ramifications in terms of pushing the sea and the erosion to other parts of the bay. So you have to have a holistic approach when you're looking to protection of the seawall. And we have involved OPW flood section in this as well, and coastal section, and they're mapping the whole coast of Ireland, and actually they're going to be doing a LiDAR survey, which is it's a digital survey from aircraft, and they will be doing a LiDAR survey of the whole coast from Waterford up to Galway this year, and they've gone out to tender on that. So we'll have up-to-date maps of the coastline. So I mean, there's a huge amount being done in other areas in the OPW. I mean, there's billions being spent on flood relief. So I think the emphasis has been on saving property and saving lives and saving farms and whatever. Yeah. But I think now the saving of historic properties and sites for the future has entered the conversation. Let's put it that way. Of course.
Yeah. No, and it's really, really emphasized as well in the few illustrations that you showed from some of the sites of, say, late 19th century records and the comparative records of the level of intrusion on the sites by climate change. Okay, another one. Are there plans to use the spatial data collected about the erosion and the sites themselves to help to visualize these sites for visitors in the future?
Yes, I think so. I mean, we will have interpretive signage at Dunbeg, and that will tell the climate change story as well, because it's a story. It's an archaeological story as well. That your side of the house is kind of involved in, and how this site has been eroding over the last couple of decades and centuries. So we will use that as kind of a model, and the same at Ballinskelligs. We will have interpretive signage. I mean, Skellig Michael, like, there's a huge amount that we're doing there in terms of the videos you've seen, posting videos on what we're doing on the site. So yes, I think, and also we're doing a climate change vulnerability assessment on Skellig Michael this year, and we'll have a expert meeting, and then we'll have a stakeholder meeting involving the local community, the boatmen, Fáilte Ireland, and the Chamber of Commerce or whatever. So, we are going to disseminate knowledge about climate change and how it's going to affect tourism, because essentially, I suppose, we are part of the heritage industry, but also part of the tourist industry. And a site like Skellig Michael is because we opened it July now of this year, it's hugely important for that whole economy down in that part of Kerry and nationally. So, there's a question about resources, about where you put resources into sites, and I think obviously Skellig Michael would be top of the list, and Ballinskelligs is there also because it's linked with Skellig Michael, and it's on the Wild Atlantic Way and whatever. What may happen is certain island sites that aren't visited or do not have a ferry service or whatever might fall off the radar, may not get the resources, and may end up disappearing, and we may not be able to put the resources into securing them from climate change.
It strikes me, Fergus, as well, that of course it's necessary that the site is only open from May to September, but it's probably useful as well for the remaining months, that the months are available for monitoring and for keeping track of any rockfall or damage to the site, the more severe weather times of the year.
Well, at the moment, there's nobody there from September to about April every year. And we actually don't have any monitoring at the moment. I mean, local boatmen may tell us, look, we've seen a rockfall or whatever, because it'll damage the seawall. So they'll say, look, there's a big rock protruding through the seawall. But we are putting CCTV, or planning to put CCTV at some stage onto Skellig Michael to monitor unauthorized access and to monitor the pier area. And the question mark is, can that stay in place over the winter period to monitor what's happening at the pier in terms of storm surges? But basically, Skellig Michael isn't very accessible during the winter months to anybody. Only occasionally you get a good day or maybe a week down in Kerry, but you know yourself. So it's not that accessible during those months, and we have to put a crew on. So you're not going to put them in the middle of winter and maroon them there for weeks. They're not lighthouse keepers, So, so it's quite an extreme site like that,
Yeah, and the lighthouse aspect of it is really fascinating too. That you had communities out there, the lighthouse men, but also their families.
It's fascinating. I mean, they started with families. That lighthouse was divided in 2 houses, and you had them out there with their families, and you had tragedies out there. There's a whole history. They're like the lighthouse keeper. 2 of his children died there, and then he wrote to the Irish Lights saying, "Look, I've 1 child left. I want to go to the mainland while my remaining child survives." So they're buried up at the monastery. You'll go up there and you'll see a little grave slab. So it's very poignant. And we've had lighthouse keepers disappear.
Really?
Yeah,
really?
I mean, they may have committed suicide, or they may have been blown away by a wave. And you had an American bomber in the Second World War crashed into Skellig because I think it mistook it for a submarine. So there's a lot of history around, and we'd like to tell that history as part of the alternative tour. So I think we were discussing earlier, some people balk at going up to the monastery when they arrive there. Well, they may be offered the alternative tour up the Lighthouse Road. While your family or the group you've come with or your partner goes up to the monastery, you can take it's not leisurely, there's quite a steep gradient, but you can take the other route maybe up to the upper lighthouse.
That seems like a good option. Just one other question that I see here. Now, none of us are geologists here today, but there's a question as to what the geology of the sites is, like what is the rock?
But it's the red sandstone in Skellig. But I'm not an expert in rocks. We do have a geologist on the team, and he's been working on the island with my predecessor Grellan Bork for many years. So he's going to be issuing his draft report on the rocks in Skellig Michael this year. So I'm not an expert in it, to be quite honest, and I think you need to be an expert to talk knowledgeably about the geology of Skellig Michael. The only thing I'd say is that it's easy to quarry the stone there, and that's why the monks chose it. That they quarried it themselves with the instruments that they had at the time, and they built all those steps themselves. So they had they made a ready-made quarry in the island. And we actually do the same thing. We use all the material if we're doing we rebuild walls with stone from the island and whatever. If a rockfall comes down, as you saw, we break up those rocks and we reuse them to do repairs on the Lighthouse Road. So nothing is wasted on that island.
So that's very authentic. And then you mentioned for Ballinskelligs as well as Skellig, the use of the Valentia slate, which is as close as you can get really in terms of a source of stone.
Well, it's an indigenous material, and it's what's interesting about Ballinskelligs is we wanted to see if we could do that in a medieval roof and with the timber dowels, and then it did withstand the Atlantic storms because they're big, heavy slates. Whereas if we put in a more modern roof, we'd have to put in many more stainless steel nails or whatever. And then on Skellig, the lighthouse keepers would have brought it was quite a thin kind of sandstone capping, which they probably put on all the walls all over the UK and Ireland back then. But a lot of them have been lost, so we've decided to put in the Valentia slate because it's much heavier and it's not going to lift off because that lighthouse is quite high above the sea, but there is anecdotal evidence of windows being broken in that lighthouse by the wave action.
Can well imagine.
So it has to be sturdy and it has to stay in place.
Yeah. Well, there are so many factors that unite the 3 sites that we've seen in your presentation today, Fergus. But as I said at the very beginning, we feel really lucky to be able to hear your lecture today, but also that viewers and members of the public will be able to view it again on the museum YouTube channel. So, I mean, you can't replace the unique experience of visiting Skellig and the extent to which you can visit Dunbeg at the moment. But what we've seen today, I think, is a very, well, fascinating, amazing, really, virtual visit to all those 3 sites, along with Fergus's unique experience and expertise accompanying the presentation. I don't think we've any further questions, and thank you to everybody who has posted up such positive comments about the presentation. Very interesting presentation, pictures were stunning. That's the general tenor of the comments that those of you who are in attendance today have remarked upon. Another one in the same vein, excellent presentation, thank you. So before we finish, well, lastly, of course, I want to thank Fergus once again. It's been wonderful having him actually present with us today to answer the questions. And finally, I wanted to return to Siobhan, who is going to update us on the final lecture in the series. And thank you once again, particularly to Fergus, but for all of you too who have been here present today, and those of you who've commented as well. Thank you.
Okay, Nessa, and yes, again, I just echo what you were saying. That was a fascinating talk, and it's amazing to see all the resources, technological, the skills and the knowledge that's needed to, take care of those sites. And there's just so many critical things to watch and keep an eye on. And you mentioned the Discovery Programme during your talk and their drone footage, and indeed, the next talk is going to be exactly a month's time. It's on Friday, the 20th of August. And it's going to be by Sandra Henry. And she's the lead research archaeologist for the Cherish programme and is based with the Discovery programme here in Dublin. She's going to concentrate primarily on promontory forts and look especially at the east coast. So she's going to be looking at counties Dublin, Wexford, Waterford, and she will give a nod to Kerry as well. We can't forget Kerry, I think, ever in this lecture series. So thank you again, Fergus, for that amazing talk, and Nessa for coordinating everything with us as well, and to Tricia in the education department, who's been managing a lot of the IT behind the scenes on this, and also to Gavin, our IT wizard, and to our marketing department as well. So hopefully we'll see you all on Friday, the 20th of August during Heritage Week for the next talk on the Cherish project. Thank you.
Thank you.